Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Oddwictum.
This is Merps. We are a few days slash almost a week into the new expansion. My hair is a little bit crazy, but that's not what we're here for today. Let's talk about the arena. Let's talk about the experiences so far and some genuine surprises that have come out of the first few days of the arena meta.
Yeah, so Darkmoon Fair is here. And before we go into the actual meta, and there's so much to talk about in the meta because it is like a pretty exciting meta, whether you love it or hate it. It's definitely an interesting meta, and it's very different than I don't know about very different. I think it's very different. But if you've been playing the arena for the past 2 months, it's probably not like too different, but it certainly got more interesting. So we're going to start off with like some cards, right? So first of all, some cards don't exist. Let's start with there. Let's start with the normal thing that happens every time, Blizzard has to do anything that relates to the arena, which is that Blizzard messes up. Not in ways that they intended, most likely. And in this case, there's something like 15 cards that are just not in the arena, including almost all of the Shaman class cards.
Yeah, so 15 cards are missing from the arena. I'm going to list them out right now. Fairground Fool, Insatiable Fellhound, Fellscream Blast, Bladed Lady, Fellsteel Executioner, Cenarian Ward, Day at the Fair, Dunk Tank, Kathir Ritualist, Revolve, Rigged Fair Game, Stilt Stepper, Storm Strike, Throne Glaive, and Whack-a-Null Hammer. It's weird because it disproportionately affects stuff like classes like Shaman and also Demon Hunters. And a lot of these cards are really good, but if we're talking about, maybe this was done in the sake of balance, it doesn't really make sense because some of these cards just, this isn't a case of a Twin Tyrant being banned when they did the years ago rebalancing and they banned stuff like the summoner and also like what was it, the auto barber for rogues and everything. This was unannounced. There's no reason
They messed up. They just messed up.
Yeah, they just messed up. And it's weird because these are all different classes, different cards of varying qualities and what they do. It just doesn't make a lot of sense as to why these cards were all missing from the arena.
Yep. So we're in this weird meta right now where presumably they're going to add these cards in, and there's so many of them, and they literally are taking two classes, Rogue and Shaman, also Demon Hunter, and they're like going to completely change their identities when they come in. So we're kind of in this weird meta because, in large part, because of the missing cards. Yeah. So I don't know. The next cards that were, I don't know, is there anything else to say about this besides just that they're not in the arena, so know that in case you're drafting these classes that you shouldn't expect
Just
them.
know that if you were even thinking of playing around any of these cards, don't.
Yeah, that too.
But other than that, it's just a wait and see approach. It's obviously a mistake on Blizzard's part, so let's just wait and see when they, when/if they publicly acknowledge it. I doubt they'll ever publicly acknowledge it. I think they'll just flip the switch back on and let these cards back into the arena at some point. But we'll just have to wait and see for that, when that's gonna happen.
Yep. All right. So those are the cards that are missing. The cards that are not missing include some more errors. So we're not done yet with Blizzard messing up here. The offering rates of Darkmoon Fair Epic cards, and just the Darkmoon Fair ones, not the other ones from all the other expansions that are currently in the meta. Just the Darkmoon Fair ones are the same as common cards. We don't know why. We don't know if this was intentional. We presume it's not intentional, but the three epic cards that are neutral that you're going to see everywhere, and you probably have seen everywhere if you've been playing the arena, are Carnival Clowns, Darkmoon Rabbits, and Horrendous Growth. So you are seeing way more of those cards than you should. We're talking like at least 4 times as often as you should. And that has a really big impact on the meta because they're all pretty meta impactful cards. We'll go over with I'll go over them like kind of like one by one. The first one is Carnival Clown. We rated it a 266, which is pretty much the same as a claw machine. We got a lot of pushback for it from some people for some reason, but at least so far, it's performing on HS Replay like a super premium card at about the same win rate as Claw Machine, and it's the 4th highest win rate neutral non-legendary in the game, and that's just HS Replay. Which includes like all stats, right? So the average of HS Replay stats is probably like a 4.5 win player or something. There's not much more to say about this card that we haven't already, but you are seeing it way more often than you have before, which means that it is heavily meta relevant. Whereas because it was a epic card, it was not going to be too meta relevant, even though it had such a high score. But it is. So if turn 9 is coming out, always like think about Carnival Clown. And if you're debating between saving a Flame Strike and not saving a Flame Strike, save the Flame Strike because you don't want to get totally screwed when they Carnival Clown you at some point. I've definitely Flame Striked a triggered Carnival Clown before, and it felt really, really good. And the other thing about Carnival Clown is that there's actually... Okay, this is going to play out with the next piece. But like I said before, Darkmoon Rabbit is also one of these cards affected, so it's showing up 4 times as often as it should. And that is a 10 mana neutral card. So Carnival Clowns are also not just good for what they are, but they're also being triggered more frequently than they normally should. And a corrupted Carnival Clown is freaking insane. It goes beyond just like premium or like even high premium. It becomes like game ending if you don't have a Flame Strike, right? So the chances of you being able to hit that combo has also significantly gone up.
Yeah, so to give people a little bit of perspective on exactly what we mean by these cards are boosted, and whether it's intentional or not, it has a huge effect on the meta. So I'm looking at Priest cards right now. Priest is middle of the pack in terms of their win rates, so it's always I just pick one of those classes because you never want to really look at the bottom or the top. So I'm picking Priest, and I'm looking at only neutral cards right now, and you are seeing Carnival Clown at about the same rate as Imprisoned Vilefiend and Rocket Og Merchant.
Mm-hmm.
So common, neutral, good low drops, right, that people tend to take at a decent amount. It is about the same, and it's 3% higher than Circus Amalgam, which, you know, Circus Amalgam is not the premium that Carnival Clown is, but Circus Amalgam just, you know, everyone is drafting it a decent amount of times. You see Carnival Clowns in 19.7% of all decks. You see Circus Amalgams only in 16.5% of decks. So with the 3 epics in the new set, the neutral epics, Carnival Clown, Horrendous Growth, and Darkmoon Rabbit in Priest, you're seeing them respectively 19.7, 17.6, and 15%. 15, the lowest one is Rabbit because it's a little bit more situational, right? I understand.
Well, it's because if you're in Priest, you have mind control anyway. Like you have good big late game like killers.
Yeah, people might not be taking it. So you're seeing that, okay, the new epic cards, the span is 15 to 20% of all decks. You look at any other epic card, the next closest one is Escaped Mana Saber. So that's from, you know, a previous expansion, and that is only at 8%. So there's something going on here where, and then of course, Transfer Student is at 7%. So there's something going on here, which is heavily boosting the appearance rate of all of these epics. We haven't really seen this before. There's no reason, and it's not just for all epics, right? It's for the new epic neutral cards.
Only those 3 cards.
Only those 3 cards, for some reason, whether it's a mistake or it's intentional, we don't know because no one has said anything about it. And I doubt they will. They'll either just leave it or they'll, you know, nerf the offering rates. And then the only way we'll know is to check HS Replay. But as of right now, this really weird thing is going on that we certainly didn't expect. I don't think anyone expected because we've never seen something like this before.
Yeah, and it really warps the meta. When you have clowns and rabbits in the meta, and neutral, which is in every single class, this is it's heavily impactful on the entire meta, and it's creating some, like, frankly, some problems in ways that you have to design your decks. So I really hope that they revert this, that they like actually address this problem, because it's clearly a bug. And while they're adding the cards in, like, they just have some stuff to fix in the arena that they messed up on. That's not like, oh, it's a balancing issue. It's like, no, you just messed up like how the game rules should work at a pretty basic level. So get on that. So clowns are impactful. The other two cards, Darkmoon Rabbit, we started it at a 133. It's performing at around a 133. Just kind of a very good card. I don't know what else to say about it, but when you're like trying to play around stuff, I mean, rabbits are showing up in, what does it say, like 15% of decks? You have to think about rabbits. Like, if they're in 15% of all decks, that's any opponent you meet. And, they wouldn't have been played out before turn 10 because they're 10 mana. You really have to kind of play around rabbits if you're ahead, to the extent that you can. Like, there's something you need to think about. Definitely positioning, but also just even if you want to play multiple large things without relevant death rattles or whatever. That's something to keep in mind. And then finally, the other epic card in neutral is Horrendous Growth, which is a 2-mana 2/2. And we'll start the discussion with Horrendous Growth, because what we're going to talk about next is we're going to go over the keyword that's having a pretty big impact in the meta, which is Corrupt. It's their main keyword. It's on a whole bunch of good neutral cards, and you're just seeing them. You're seeing them everywhere, and they are impacting the meta. And we'll kind of talk more about how to think about them and what their impact on is the meta. So let's talk about this epic card first. Horrendous Growth, 2-mana 2/2, Corrupt, gain +1/+1, can be corrupted endlessly. Remember, the offering rate bug means that this is appearing in your offering charts as often as any common card. So you might as well treat it as a common for now until they fix it. So we rated it at a 82 to start. And Merps, you think that is too low?
I definitely think that it's a little bit too low. Now, do I think here's the thing. I think some people out there actually think it's like a premium card. No, it's not. Like, let me just stop you guys right there. This is yet again another card that suffers from the disproportionate memory and confirmation bias kind of thing that we talk about quite often, where just like with the Fleethoof Pearl Tusk and everything, you're going to see and you're going to remember the best Horrendous Growths. You're going to remember the best ones in your end as well, and you're going to forget about the bad ones. That's just how we work. That's just how human kind of cognition and memory works. But I do think that there is a place in the meta for it, mostly just because of the speed of the meta, how reactive it is, and the fact that you do sort of need that value right now. So it was one of those cards where at the very beginning, I was like, I don't know. Like, it might be the score, it might not, but it's not great. And right now I'm thinking it's definitely higher than 82, but it's not like... I've had people like basically tell me they think it's an actual like good card or a premium card, and it's not. Like, it's not that good. But
yeah, I mean, I've had people who like think of it as an auto pick, and that's clearly not true. But is it Yeti level or even above Yeti level? It's probably at least Yeti level, and we have it significantly below Yeti. So that's definitely a miss there, and we know why, and it's currently being fixed, but these are systemic changes, so I was hoping to get the fix out before today, but it's not going to come until later, probably like mid next week, or maybe even later if we run into some more issues. The thing with Horrendous Growth, of course, is that you have to wait, right? Like, and then later on you get a little bit of a tempo boost. It's like kind of like Nerubian Prophet, which is another card that we are underrating. Well, we're slightly underrating it. I don't know if that one's going to go significantly up, but it's also performing really well in this meta, because this meta is all about that late game swing right now. So it's very suitable for these kinds of cards. But at the same time, right, a 0 or 1 mana like 4/4 in the late game, how big of an impact is that when you're not playing it on curve? How big of an impact is a 2 mana 4/4 or 6/6, right? Like, it is an impact. It's definitely like you feel that swing, but it's not the biggest swing that, you can't think of it as, oh, I'm getting like triple the stat, or like double or triple the stats that I should from a 2-drop. You're getting them way later in the game. You've had a dead card for a while. So it all kind of impacts it. Horrendous Growth is performing right now significantly above a Yeti, kind of on the edge between a premium and a non-premium card. But for all corrupt cards, I very much do not think the HS replay stats are capturing them correctly, because one of the things that you do in this meta as a good player, and you will see in this meta as you get higher in the win rates, is that players are much more aggressive at hitting your face, because they want to end the game or be put in a position where they do a big swing and they're already threatening lethal, so that you can't reset up. You have to start actively removing their stuff once they do their big swing. It's this huge advantage that whoever is the initial aggressor and can get the opponent down to like 18 health-ish, like, has. So a lot of good players are either drafting more cohesively aggressive decks, especially because Demon Hunter normally just plays that way, and they are by far the best class in the meta right now, at like 56% win rate or something ridiculous, and also because just the meta overall favors it, right? If Demon Hunters do that way, they're going to knock you down, but you're also going to need to design your deck in a way to survive a Demon Hunter, right? That's how it always works. So Demon Hunters are really driving a lot of the meta right now, and it's making these corrupt card effects better at lower win rates and worse at higher win rates. As the decks get more and more cohesive, you have less and less room to go to the late game. Whereas let's say in the created by meta, right after Skullomance came out, as the decks get better and better, they didn't get any more aggressive. They just got better and more ridiculous at the late game stuff, so that you would have the same amount of time. But that's not what's happening in this meta. Between the Demon Hunter meta and the fact that you just see more of them at high win rates, and just that's the right way to play in this meta for most decks, your corruptions, your cards that need to be corrupted, especially ones that need to be corrupted to have a significant effect. So I'm not talking about like the dirigible. Like the dirigible is a great 3-drop, and it'll be corrupted in later turns on the same turn before you play it, right? So that's totally fine. But the harder to corrupt cards that you actually have to wait a little bit for. And this one, the Horrendous Growth, which it's not very hard to corrupt, but you do have to wait for it because you want it to be multi-corrupted, especially if you're not like playing it early. Their win rates are inflated right now on HS Replay, because HS Replay captures 4.5 win per run players on average. That's their average situation. And we expect you to do better. Anyway. That being said, starting off with Horrendous Growth, it is underrated. I've played with it a lot. I've seen it played against me. I don't think it's ever won a game one way or the other, but it's certainly been helpful in a way that like makes me think of it. Like in my mind, I'd probably still take a Yeti over it, but you can convince me otherwise. Assuming I need a 4-drop. So that's Horrendous Growth. And moving on from Horrendous Growth, we're now going to take over all the other corrupt ones, right? So Horrendous Growth isn't the only card that we think we underrated. Horrendous Growth we put in at 19 points below a Yeti, right? Another card we put at 19 points below a Yeti is Darkmoon Statue. And Darkmoon Statue right now is performing above a Yeti. And more importantly, it fits in exactly with the kind of card that I think HS Replay may be capturing the win rates better than with other corrupt cards. Because later on, you can corrupt it the same turn that you play it. And it was never designed to be a curve card anyway. So you're never like tasked with like hard decision making of like, oh, do I play this card or not? Like, no, you don't play your Darkmoon Statue until you corrupt it. Like, you have to be really freaking desperate to do it beforehand, because the difference between an 0-5 and a 4-5 is like freakishly huge, and it's only a 3 mana card, so it's very easy to corrupt, and you can play it on the same turn that you corrupt it, starting turn 7 and above. And it's a situational card even in the first place, because you need stuff on the board with initiative for it to like get its like true power, right, when you play it. So you'll be waiting anyway. So all these factors put together like make this an easy card to play. Like, this is a very low skill card to play, unlike Horrendous Growth, in which you really have to know how much you need those stats and how much you need the tempo. Or even like something like Fleet Hoof, right? Where you sometimes just have to play it as a bad 4/4 rush, but that's so much more important than like waiting to potentially like corrupt it. You don't have to make any decisions with Darkmoon Statue. You almost always wait for it to get corrupted. So this is a card that I would put at definitely Yeti level, if not higher, and the tier list will come to reflect that.
Yeah, Statue is a card that I will say I have not been impressed by. I've played against it a few times. I've had it a few times. And this is a card in which I, like from my personal experience, and I've actually played it quite a lot this week, it has not impressed me at all. The payoff has not been great. And anytime I get it in my starting hand, I'm just like, wow, this really sucks. Like, it is actually just unplayable, right?
Yeah, it's not playable as a 3. You could just like pretend it says 5 mana, and you gain 2 mana back.
Yeah, so it's just one of those cards in which the Horrendous Growth I can see because I have seen it myself in my hand and also played against me. And here's what you need to be doing when you're trying to evaluate this stuff. And I'm hoping not to alienate a lot of people, but some people are just not good enough to be like tracking opponents' hands and also looking at your hand and every single turn asking yourself, what if this were just a normal card? Like, an average mid-sized card, right? Would it be okay? And I understand a lot of people are thinking about other stuff, and then
it's also like a very hard like psychological exercise to do, right? Because if it's a normal card, that interacts with your hand and your board and your decision making so much differently than it being the card that's literally in your face staring at you.
Right. So it's one of those things where I've looked at it and growth has impressed me. But the statue, whenever I've drafted it, whenever I tracked people and I see the sacrifices they've had to make and how far behind they are. Because here's the thing, like the games that I've quote lost to Darkmoon Statue, if they just had a decent card in that slot, they would have either beaten me faster or they might have been able to beat me had they had a better card. And that's the metric that you should always be using. Not did they beat me and use this card, which is a metric that most people, even a lot of good players, use. If they beat me and they had this card, then that means this card is good. No, that's actually the totally wrong analysis. It's like, how much did that card contribute / take away from their expected win? That's like the correct way to do it, which unfortunately not a lot of people do, and not a lot of people can do, because you first have to actually like understand the game to a certain level. And I know I'm sounding elitist here, but it is what it is. So I could definitely be wrong here. That card just has not like, if we're talking about Horrendous Growth, that's impressed me. If we're talking about the statue, not yet. The sacrifice is just too much for right now.
So there was one time I lost a game because the opponent played a statue. Other times the opponent played a statue, and it was like, it could have been whatever other card, it would have been fine. But it also didn't hurt them that much, like, to have it, compared to like something like a Yeti. And I have played with Darkmoon Statue. I think it's been in at least 2, maybe 3 of my decks. And every time I've had it in my deck, it's been amazing. Like, I'm not talking about like Twin Tyrant levels of amazing, but I've always saw it and used it in a way where I'm like, you know what? I could see why I may take this next time over a curve card. And your standard curve card in this tier list right now is about a 100, right? Like, in 100 for a 2, a little over 100 for a 3, about 100 for a Yeti. So It's just, I mean, this is right now sitting at 82, and it's going to, like, I feel like it should come up to a level that's at least around a 100. Its win rate says it's like a tiny bit, like maybe it should be like a 105, maybe a 110 even. But I kind of like, I wouldn't draft it that high. Like I said, right, even though this is the kind of the perfect card for, you know, bad players, because it's so easy and straightforward in terms of when you use it. I mean, the perfect corrupt card, not the perfect card, the perfect corrupt card for bad players. And so HS Replay is representing that, I think, pretty well. I'm still a little hesitant to put it like over a Yeti, but definitely not in the low 80s where it currently is right now. Okay, so those are the two corrupt cards that we have underrated on the tier list, and I think it's rare historically for us to get neutral cards wrong, but we also did miss like Vilefiend like pretty hard when that came out. So it's definitely not the first time we like missed a mechanic, and I know why. Like from an algorithm perspective, it had to do with a bug that's not a bug, just like a miscalculation that we've been doing on our played rates and our comparison between cards in the algorithm. It's been in the algorithm for a long time. It just hasn't like reared its head in such an obvious way until now, and that's also why something like Horrendous Growth is particularly low, and that'll be fixed. And I can't say where it'll actually end up, but these cards will be higher. But it doesn't mean that we got corrupt entirely wrong. In fact, the other three corrupt cards, the actual four corrupt cards, but I don't know that we could say anything about Dirigible. I'm just kind of leaving Dirigible off because Dirigible is very good. We all thought it was going to be very good, and it would have been very good even without the corrupt. So it's kind of hard to take like win rates or anything to mean anything. In fact, if anything, Dirigible is kind of underperforming on the win rates. Like, you would think Dirigible would just kind of have a higher win rate. And I think it's underperforming in the win rates in HS Replay because people are holding Dirigible waiting to corrupt it when there is absolutely no need to wait to corrupt the Dirigible. And that's like a classic bad player move, right?
It's definitely a harder card to play relative to something like Statue, in which it's basically never the correct play to play it on 3. So cards that actually just force players to play it in one way are good. Like that's good because you can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
So with something like Dirigible, I am sure that people are taking a suboptimal play on 3 to try to get the rush, and meanwhile they just lose because of it.
Yeah, like think about what rush means, right? You have like generally, like imagine if Yeti had the word rush on it. That would be a normal card to print these days. We wouldn't be like, oh, what an insane neutral card. We'd be like, all right, that's a premium neutral card. So Rush is worth something, but not that much. And I think people like do crazy things and wait with the Dirigible. They have to, or else that win rate just would be higher. We started Dirigible at a 182, which is lower than the 200 we had it on when we were doing the video. But we were not dropping it or increasing it or anything. At least I don't know what the changes we're going to do will affect this, but I think if it increases, it'll be by very few points because the algorithm knows that the corrupted version is not particularly that much better than the uncorrupted version. So that's one that we're just kind of leaving aside because, like, I think we still got it right. And if anything, the win rates are saying that this corrupt mechanic we're overrating, but I don't think we are. I think people are just being dumb with it. The way that Acetic Swamp Ooze has a lower win rate than Raptor, like for the longest time. Okay, the other 3 corrupt cards in neutral, I think we got it pretty well. We got it right, and they all feature the same thing, which is that they're higher mana. So our algorithm was actually a bit more accurate on its costs. In terms of the cost to actually trigger it and how long it stays in your hand. And they are Circus Medic, Fleethoof, Pearl Tusk, and Strongman. So if you watch the video or listen to the Lightforge podcast, but you didn't and you haven't looked at the tier list, you may not know, but like Strongman, for example, went up about 10 points between the video and when we actually released the tier list, not because we thought Strongman was all of a sudden better, we just the algorithm just was getting updated during that time, and it'll be updated again. And Strongman is performing at around that kind of level of being about 6 points below a Yeti. It's hard to trigger, and when it triggers, it's quite good, right? Strongman 7 mana 6/6 taunt, corrupt, this cost 0. Same with a Fleethoof Pearl Tusk. We have it 13 points above a Yeti. It's performing right now maybe like 20 points above a Yeti, but like I said, with these normal kinds of corrupt cards, the more pressure your opponent puts on you, the more you can't wait to corrupt these cards. And the higher win rates you get to, you see more Demon Hunters. And not only that, but just this meta, people just put more pressure on your face. So Fleethoof Pearl Tusk is right now performing about 20 points better than a Yeti, but I think 13 points above a Yeti feels right. And that's the 5 mana 4/4 rush that becomes an 8/8 rush. Having played a lot with Fleethoof, because we rated it a good card, right? So I've been taking it. It's definitely good to wait to corrupt it. I've probably been playing it as a corrupted version maybe 75% of the time, and as the uncorrupted version maybe 25% of the time. If you have a card in your hand that's above 5 mana, I would definitely wait for it. If you don't have a card that's above 5 mana, it's more 50-50 whether you play it or you just keep waiting, depending on your deck, depending on the situation. I've definitely used it to deal like 2 damage before, when I like really needed to remove something, and I thought it was the right play. But having an 8/8 rush, like, you know how Shovel Fist is no longer in the meta, and there's no more hard removals in the meta with besides the Darkmoon Rabbit? Well, Fleethoof Pearl Tusk is your hard removal in the meta, hard removal neutral in the meta. So especially if you're a class that can't hard remove, like, getting Fleethoofs is kind of this like weird workaround, right? But it'll work most of the time. So I think there's definitely it's a very interesting card. Like, Fleethoof is probably, I think, the most interesting neutral card in this meta. Any experiences with Fleethoof?
No, that's definitely a card where I'm like, I have not been impressed by it. Right, it is really tough to corrupt it, and the meta isn't lacking for initiative.
No.
So it's not like Hoof Pearl Tusk is adding something that is in dire need. You have an abundance of clears and initiative, and a lot of classes added super premium initiative. So you don't really need it, and it's hard to trigger. So it really isn't great. So yeah, like, just keep on staying away. That, unless.
What? Wait, would you actually stay? Do you at least agree it's better than a Yeti?
I think it's around the same.
Okay.
It's like around the same-ish.
All right, so you're actually down on it.
No one's chasing to draft a Yeti.
Right.
Like, a Yeti is not a great card in your deck anymore.
It's a below average, significantly below average card.
Significantly below
average. And Fleethoof is as well. The way we rate it at like a 114. That's significantly below the average in your deck right now.
Yeah, because your deck is really good these days.
Your deck is schizophrenic these days. Like, there are so many bad cards I find in my deck. And then obviously there's also, like, the average is really high. But then I'm forced to put, like I've probably drafted more cards in the 70s and below in this meta than in any previous meta.
Yeah. No, it's definitely that, like, feast and famine kind of thing where, which also contributes to just some bad games where you draw your bad cards, you don't draw your good cards, and you just get absolutely blown out. Because not only are you dependent on your draws relative to the curve as to, like, oh, am I able to play stuff? You're also thinking, God, I gotta draw my good cards.
No.
And not only do you have to draw your good cards, a lot of it is, I have to draw my good cards that work with each other, that combo with each other. Because gone are the days where we could just play cards that work well individually, within its own little ecosystem, and it's fine. You have to draft for combos. You have to draft for interactions these days in order to go really far. Now, you don't want to make like a complete meme deck if you're focused on winning, but you do have to, take synergies and take combos into effect. But what it means is you're leaving yourself a little bit more vulnerable as well. So, like, you just have to take that risk. But it does mean that in a meta like this, where decks are really polarized, you are somewhat at the mercy of your draws, and you can go from one game to the other where it has like no relation. Like you're facing a person of equal deck quality, of equal strength, maybe even the same class. One game you get absolutely demolished. The other game you absolutely demolish them. So that's kind of what happens with this meta and with the offering rates and with the high average deck score, but disparate values of individual cards.
Yep, yep. And we'll talk about the meta after this as well, in deeper fashion. But that's definitely a major issue that's hurting this meta from being what it could be. It's what happens when you put bad cards in, and it's what happens when you put really, really good cards in, and it's what happens when you
old god cards.
Yes, old god cards and classic, and a lot of the classic cards.
And some classic cards,
So yeah,
yes.
old god cards and some classic cards. And then you put them in the same pool as like claw machines and carnival clowns. Sure, you can give everybody all the same kinds of cards, but even if you don't high roll or low roll your draft, you're going to have a diverse set of cards. And if you draw the wrong ones, it's going to be bad. But before we get there, I want to talk about one last card, the last corrupt card, and also another really interesting one, and that's the corrupt card besides dirigible that we rated the highest coming in. It is Circus Medic at 18 points above a Yeti, and that's the 4-mana card. That's a 3/4, and you heal for 4, or if you corrupt it, you deal 4 damage. And we always rated that pretty high, even though its normal uncorrupted version is pretty bad because it's a 4-mana card. It's not that hard to corrupt. And having used it and had it used against me, it is that 4-mana zone is the most interesting for corrupt, I think, because it's easy to corrupt. You're never worried about whether you can corrupt it. What you're worried about is whether you should wait until you corrupt it, because you don't always play a 5-mana card on 5, and then it really messes kind of with your entire hand because it's such a big upgrade once you can corrupt this card. Like 4 mana, deal 4 damage, and summon a 3/4. That's the equivalent of like corrupting your Horrendous Growth like at least 4 times minimum, probably more than that. And that you just have to play one card to keep it corrupted. And at the same time, sometimes you want to heal. Like, it's not necessarily a benefit to be able to corrupt it, depending on your situation. Like, if you have the board, healing and the health could be as good as dealing the damage. If you don't have the board and you're, like, dying, but you stabilize, you want to heal your face. You don't want to, get more initiative cards, especially because the meta's full of initiative cards. It's a very interesting card. It's a very powerful card, and I'm definitely looking forward to playing more with it. I have not played this card to its full potential, but I've seen it used against me to its full potential, and I haven't been offered it like too often. And I think I'm going to prioritize it. It also has a pretty high win rate, maybe about 5 to 10 points above where we put it, but maybe more like 5 points than 10, about 5 points more than where we put it. And it's one of those cards where I have a feeling that good players should be able to use it even better than average players. So, if anything, I think the HS Replay stats may be underrating Circus Medic. So, I'm definitely interested in exploring it more.
It's quite a good card, and I agree with the complexities in using it. I've reached a point, like multiple points in my arena runs this week, where I've had to think, which one do I want, and how do I prevent myself from not procking the one I don't want effectively. Because I've had pressure both ways, where I want to corrupt it, and in other games I want to play this, like that's a card that's much more expensive, but I don't want to corrupt it because I actually need the heal. So and then of course lots of the times I just want the heal, and it works out. So it adds a lot more options, but it also restricts you a little bit if you want specifically the choice that you want, and sometimes it's a little bit awkward. So I like the design of the card. I've used it to good effect, and I agree with the score where it is right now. And I think it's just a super duper interesting card that's caused me to think a lot more than than I anticipated.
Yeah. Like when I saw it, I was like, "Oh, interesting card," and then I actually have it in my hand, and I'm like, "Ooh." All the things I have to think about now just because this card is in my hand, even if I'm not even going to play it. It's really added a bunch of complexity. So yeah, of the 6 corrupt cards, I think we got 2 of them wrong, Darkmoon Statue and Horrendous Growth, and 4 of them we got right. Remember, if we're moving a card 5 points, that pretty much means we got it right. The score goes from like over 200 to like 0. Like 5 points is well within the ballpark of it being like just kind of, I mean, not actually a rounding error. We have rounding errors up to a maximum of 3 points. So it is not because of that. It is because we actually missed something, but it's very tiny. It has a very tiny effect. And if you're ever looking at the tier list, you're comparing 2 cards that are 5 points apart. Don't put too much stock into it. Obviously, like the rest of your deck and how it impacts the card is definitely way more important at that point than the score differential. So yeah, just wanted to give you guys that update. There are certainly other cards that we potentially have missed, but I haven't been too focused on that, and I don't think any of them are, and let me know if you disagree, but I don't think any of them are in neutral. Has there been something in neutral that you've been like, oh, this is way better than we thought it was, or oh, this is way worse than we thought it was?
No, not really. And people keep on bringing up legendaries. So guys, legendaries are ones that we never spend that much time on.
Yeah, and we know there's a bug in Silas. There's a bug in Silas. It's going to go up. We always meant it to be over a 100, and we just didn't. We were messing with stuff all the way to the last minute. We had 3 less weeks.
Are ones that people care about the most, even though they have the least effect. And that's the thing. We care about the cards that have the most effect. So it's nice and good to be thinking about that, and it makes for interesting thought experiments, but it really doesn't affect your runs that much. Really doesn't. So that's why if you guys are like, oh, like, well, this legendary has an issue, that legendary has an issue, I can tell you, we don't spend a lot of time on legendaries, period. And even when we know that we need to fix something, a lot of times, resources go to the highest priority, and legendaries are always pretty low.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the actual meta overall. It's a really interesting meta, and I think more than that, one of the points that we try to hammer home, the number one point that we try to hammer home in our preview of the meta, is that there will be initiative everywhere, right? Initiative will be everywhere, and that is the case. I literally lost a game because the opponent played, after turn 1, the opponent played initiative every single turn until they beat me on turn 8 or 9. And there was just nothing I can do. So one of the bad parts about having a lot of initiative in the game is that even if you have a lot of initiative too, kind of the opponent can just lock you out of doing things. Because anything you try to do, the opponent will use initiative to get rid of it. And that creates a kind of a low skill floor to the meta overall. Because if you need to play minions, then you need to figure stuff out. If you have a limited amount of removals, then you need to know what you actually need to remove. If you have near unlimited removals and you can always react on the same turn and you don't have to plan one turn ahead, well, your job is a lot easier, right? Like playing control with a decent amount of card advantage and all initiative cards is just, and has always been, and is in every card game, just an easier job than playing mid-range. Like mid-range is always the most difficult to play, and aggro is more like one decision matters, right? Like your other moves are pretty basic, but then that one turn when you need to go face or whatever kind of swings the entire game. But control has some card advantage management, some baiting, some of this other stuff, but none of them matter when you're doing control, not with board clears, not necessarily with taunts and other things where you have to predict what your opponent is able to do, but rather you just have initiative, right? Like playing taunts is a lot less skillful if you know your opponent has a ridiculous amount of initiative at various attack points anyway, right? Because the board doesn't matter that much now. So as the slower player, you're just reacting, and it's a pretty low skill floor. As the aggressive player, you are just waiting to see what your opponent does, and you're using an endless amount of initiative resources anyway. So again, that's taking away a lot of decision making on your part and what you're like kind of scared of. And in mid range, it just usually ends up being whoever has more initiative that they can reasonably use. So this initiative issue is running through the entire meta right now. And what's adding to that is something that I'm going to categorize it in the effect, which is a negative effect in some ways and a positive effect in other ways. But it's really interesting to me because I definitely like it overall. This is a very, very diverse meta in terms of the kind of decks that exist. Like, in Arena HS, I remember on day one, someone was like, hey, is this meta just like a lot faster for everybody? And then the number one rated comment, which has way more upvotes than the actual like thread itself, is what? This meta's way slower. Like, it's significantly slower than the previous meta. What are you even talking about, man? And then another post went up like a couple of days ago that had the same exact thing, basically, where people just can't agree whether the meta is faster or the meta is slower, which is a really weird thing to not be able to agree on. And that's because the answer is the meta is both faster and slower, depending on what you choose to do. And not just that you have the power to push the meta faster or to slow down the meta, but if you play in a way that is vulnerable to a fast meta, you will think it's a very fast meta and you will get blown out. If you play in a way that's vulnerable to a slow meta, you will run out of steam and you will get blown out by quite a significant amount of decks. There's just so much diversity in what your opponents are able to put together as far as decks go, and also in what you're able to put together that like work in the sense that you can get somewhere between like 5 and 9 wins with it, right? Like as a 7-win player, you can get between 5 and 9 wins with this deck. You can go aggro in this meta, totally doable. And in fact, because Demon Hunter's dominating, there's a lot of aggro strategies out there. But you can also go pretty slow if you have enough taunt cards. And remember, initiative is everywhere. Initiative is the friend of the control decks. So you can do control quite well and then kind of make your opponents run out of steam. And you can, of course, always play mid-range quite well if you can adjust to what your opponents are doing and draw the right cards at the right time. But the whole thing feels a little bit out of control, partly because of what Merp said, which is that your deck quality is just kind of all over the place within the same deck. But also because you could just match up poorly against your opponents very frequently, much more frequently than in previous metas. Like, the generated by meta was annoying to a lot of people because everybody had to play the same game. But ultimately, over a long enough time, the better players will play that game better than the worst players, even through the RNG. Whereas, if you have a very diverse meta, you are much more likely to just face a deck that you can't beat no matter what skill you have and what skill your opponents have, as long as they don't totally mess up. And that's what's happening right now. So, yes, that's obviously a bad thing because it makes skill matter less, but are we really hating on the meta for allowing all types of gameplay? You know? I don't know.
Well, what the meta has become and what your drafting has become is you don't have to make the sacrifices you once did in order to accomplish a wide variety of things. Like, so because you have all of these cards that are small and also generate further value and have initiative, right? Like you are able to fill up your deck with a lot of these things. You don't. It's hard to exploit other people's weaknesses. But if you have a weakness, and by you I mean you or your opponent, it's quite easy to exploit that. So, if you have drafted a deck, whether by bad luck or maybe you just messed up, that has a weakness, a lot more people are able to exploit that in this meta than they were in previous metas just by drafting quote normally. Like they didn't have to tech to beat you. They just beat you by drafting correctly. So that's one of those things where it'll definitely feel bad to some people, and it also means that like what you should also do is just make sure there's no glaring weakness in your deck, whether it's from curve, whether it's from value. Like, you know, don't reach to take something and don't say, well, I'm this sort of deck. You see a lot of variety because there's a lot of variety in the way that you play it, But drafting wise, you don't really want to peg yourself into a specific hole. Like I tried aggro hunter, like real aggro hunter, not like mid-range aggro hunter, like aggro hunter, and it just didn't work. I actually tried multiple times. It really doesn't work, and not that it really like super worked before, but it could work a little bit in Skullman's because people were more easily pigeonholing themselves into decks that I could exploit. And now I just really can't. It's not possible. People have too many tools. People have curve and value. And just by the way that they're drafting naturally.
And hunters suck.
And hunters also really, really suck.
Like, I think part of it is also just that you don't have good cards.
Yes. Also, the fact that they supremely omega suck. But what I'm saying about kind of the meta is also true, and that it's something you do have to understand, where people aren't really sacrificing that much, and their decks are more flexible. But it doesn't mean their decks are any weaker than in previous metas.
Yeah. So you used to have, like, I remember we used to have this kind of like issue with the early game rock paper scissors, especially with like Hogsteed, right? Where if you play a 3-2, he Hogsteeds because it was kind of more curve stone, you just lose. But you know, if you do something else and then he does something else, then you just win. Like the game gets decided kind of early on these like really things that are in no one's control. Well, the rock paper scissors is no longer in the early game. The rock paper scissors now, I mean, it's not never in the early game, but now the rock paper scissors is kind of in what kind of decks you have. And depending on what kind of deck you have and what kind of deck that you end up meeting, one person's going to win and the other person's going to lose. That being said, there's a lot of decisions you can make to create outcomes in your deck, to create like more synergy or to like mitigate more damage, because it's a much more complicated game than it used to be with corrupt, with dormant, with all this card generation. And so you can create some effects. It doesn't ever make you favored if you were trying to use rock to beat paper, but it means that if the paper player messes up enough, you can still beat paper as rock. This is not all he has to do is to have a Hogsteed and know to play a Hogsteed against my Raptor. And then because there's not enough swings later on in the game, I'm just going to lose. It's not like that, right? So there is this like range where like if your opponent is bad enough of a player, and honestly, a lot of people I faced are just that bad of a players. I've also been in the like early 1-2 and 0-2 and like sorry not 0-2 but like 1-2 and 2-2 brackets a lot. So I've been facing a lot of like pretty bad players, so that I've won a lot of games that I'm just like, my deck shouldn't have been able to win that game against your deck. Not because your deck is particularly great, but your deck was just built in a way that could totally destroy me, and you just chose not to, and or miss lethal, and or like purposefully did not hit your combo for some reason, like whatever, right? So there is this like level of skill that is like on the floor that I guess people can fall below, but it's pretty easy to reach that. And if you do reach it, which is usually if you're not in the 2-loss bracket, or if you hit like 7 to 9 wins, you kind of more or less reach there. You've reached the point at which people are decent at least, or they have the most ridiculous decks, right? And from that point on, your skill matters significantly less. And this has always been true to some extent, but this meta, because of all of its diversity in deck formats, really, really like makes this apparent. So I haven't had that much trouble getting to 5 to 7 wins. I feel like I've had no more trouble getting to 5 or 7 wins than I normally do in any meta, but I've also recognized that I have not drafted great decks in my run so far. In fact, there was like one deck that I considered actually good. Maybe like 2 decks at most, and they went about as well. Like they went somewhere in the 5 and 7 range as well. But the other decks that were like trash, some of them I still got in the 5 and 7 range. So the downside in this meta is still pretty good compared to normal. So we talk about all this rock paper scissors, but and like this like, oh, you're not in control and whatever, but it's not like a hard thing. Like people can still mess up to below that line, and they do mess up to below that line, especially in the 2-loss bracket. But any competent player, like any player that I would say like averages like 5 wins, like would be able to be very easily above that line. And at that point, it becomes a lot harder to actually swing the game with your decisions.
Yep. So that's sort of where the meta is. Are you having fun with it? Do you like it?
I find the meta super interesting. I really like playing in this meta compared to the previous meta. The previous meta was kind of like, it was a good meta. It was definitely a balanced meta, but I just didn't enjoy playing it as much because I kind of knew the patterns and I knew what every game was going to come down to. And frankly, all the classes were the same. Which like I always dislike playing. Like I love diversity. That's why I build into balance. Like I think the core principles of balance is 1, a near 50-50 win rate, 2, being able to allow the player to express themselves in as many ways, if not infinite ways, that they may choose to. And I consider that part of balance, because otherwise balance is just super easy, right? You just coin flip and then you have balance. And then 3 is to make people feel that their skill has impacted their actual outcome, which means bad players need to actually lose and good players need to actually win. Those are the 3 elements of balance and the 3 elements of what I consider to be, like, I view myself as a game balancer. I did game design work and was the chief game balancer for Gods Unchained in the early part of the game for the first year. Like that's how I think about this stuff. And right now, more than ever, we are in the most diverse meta. So diversity is super high. 50-50 balance is not great. It's not the most terrible thing, but it's not great right now, mostly because Demon Hunters are kind of running away with it, and people are starting to know it, and people are starting to play it more. And if Blizzard doesn't do an adjustment for offering rates, and hopefully add the 15 cards in, please, and lower the epic offering rate to its normal size, if they don't do that soon, the meta is going to start getting pretty bad. Especially if you're trying to like get 12 wins or something. But the part that's really kind of hurting, I think, is the skill impact. It's not by any stretch of the imagination at its lowest, but it's like middling at best. And I don't know if you can improve on that. Like, I think if you created the perfect meta with this card pool, I don't know that skill impact on meta will ever rise above middling for historic Hearthstone. And maybe we just have to accept that this is not like I thought there was a way that you can make this into the highest skilled meta, like before. If you guys listened to the previous Lightforge podcast, it was 8 hours. I was very optimistic about it in the sense of that I think it was a possible thing for people to do. But now that I've actually played in this meta and I've seen what decks are drafted and what's like happening, I am a lot more pessimistic about it. Like, it's not Blizzard's fault. I think the sheer diversity and the sheer greatness of all this diversity is just having this negative effect that I had not thought would be this negative on the skill impact. And it's certainly going to get better, right? Once they take clowns and rabbits out, like lower, because clowns and rabbits are not particularly skillful. And they're going to be like significantly lowered if they fix the win rate. And it's also going to be better if you have more class diversity, which you will once you nerf the win rates to be more 50-50. So it's definitely going to go up. But skill impact is kind of on the low side right now, and I'm not sure it'll ever rise above median. But as long as they keep the diversity here, and at this point, I think it's kind of hard to mess up, like, because this new set was so good in promoting all this diversity. It's going to be an interesting meta, and that's what'll keep me like kind of engaged in the meta for a while.
Yeah, I do agree that the meta is diverse, and really the thing that is holding the meta back, and not really the meta, it's your enjoyment of, or really my enjoyment of it, is the draft and your draw. And these are foundational things that they really can't do much unless they overhaul it. But especially the draft, some drafts just feel really bad.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
This meta, like, okay, it's all relative. You always have to just compare it to historical Hearthstone. If you get a decent draft and you are able to bring that into a game and you're able to play it, right? It's like Adulta says, there's a lot of ways to express your skill. There's a lot of ways for you to figure out how to get the win. But bad drafts these days feel really bad. And they don't just feel bad. You feel helpless because they are just really bad. And then even when you get a decent draft, because some godlike drafts are always godlike drafts, right? Like 80% of your cards are all really good. But average decks sometimes are just average because you have a lot of shit cards and some really good cards, and that's average. And that's kind of an average draft / average deck these days. So what does that mean? Well, in order for you to express the average deck, you have to draw your amazing cards to balance out those really bad cards, which means in order for you to feel good and, like play the game, you have to draw them, and you have to draw them in a timely manner. So that is a really feels bad portion. And if we're talking about how bad that feels and how out of control and how much that impacts your feel goodness and really your win rate, we're at a point where like that matters a lot more than historical Hearthstone, just because of where we are and the cards that we have and everything. So that's what I don't like about it. And so I'm torn kind of. On one hand, yeah, it's new, it's interesting, I like it, but on the other hand, oh man, it just like that's the part where I personally hate feeling bad about, because it's one of those things where I'm like, well, didn't draft good cards, that sucks. Didn't draw my cards, which I needed to win, and if I just drew one of them, I would have been okay, or at least I could have like strategize somewhat, but I couldn't get it, so I guess I lose. So that always just feels really bad.
Yeah, I'm with you on the draw one. I care less about the deck. Like, if you get a bad deck, then I'm like, all right, trying to get to 5 wins, and I get like almost as much pleasure out of that as getting a normal deck and trying to bring that to 12 wins. But in the draws, especially when there's such bad cards and such good cards in your deck, it's just the disparity is so huge. And what I like to play is to kind of be given the shot with my deck, right? And you really don't feel like you have a shot with your deck if you only draw your bad cards and not your good cards. And that has a much bigger impact in this meta than other metas. Because of old gods, right? And people have wanted to bring arena rotations back. Well, this is the inevitable effect of arena rotations with the old sets. The old sets were bad by today's standards. There's been a power creep. And this is what you're always going to get, no matter what kind of wild rotation you bring. So
yeah, especially if you want to bring like actually older sets, right, like old gods. If they had brought back like Ungora,
okay, that would have been fine.
That would have been fine, because Ungora was like one of the sets in which we first got exposed to like, oh, there's some craziness that can happen, especially in neutrals, right? See Primordial Drake.
Yeah.
But with old gods was like just a boring, tame expansion, especially for arena, because the old gods never even made an impact there. So
yep,
that's it.
All right. Well, that is anything else we want to talk about the meta? We've talked for a while.
No, that's it. That's it. We've rehashed like a lot of similar ideas over and over again as well. So I think we discussed all we needed to.
All right. So let's go with we did some cards. We wanted to do a card good bad. We'll start up card good bad again next week. If you are listening to this and you watch the Arena Coup is back. We will do the Arena Coup right after this when we're doing it live on Sundays. If you tried to catch the Lightforge podcast live and you failed this week, it's because we're starting 1 hour later now than we normally do. So now all of our Twitch streams, all of our live content start at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So it's all nice and standard. We had some reasons for starting earlier on Sundays, and now the reasons don't look particularly relevant anymore. So we decided to use this opportunity with the new set to just change it so it's all even. Anything else? Question from the GOAT? Do we have a question from the GOAT?
What are your Thanksgiving plans? What are you doing for that?
Yeah, my Thanksgiving plan is usually me and Brand New go out and we go to a diner and we get some turkey because it is hell to make your own turkey and we don't have family around or anything like that. So we're gonna go grab some turkey and normal Thanksgiving food on Thanksgiving Day for lunch. And then for dinner, we're gonna be nice and cozy indoors and just watch some TV or just be thankful to kind of be here. Like, it's a weird holiday this year, right? It's 2020. What are we thankful for in 2020? But honestly, there has been I think one thing about getting hit with a lot of shit, and I've gotten hit with a lot of shit, not just with the normal COVID stuff, but also some personal stuff I haven't talked about. It does make you thankful for all the other things that you kind of taken for granted. One of the things I'm super thankful for, and I was even from pretty early on, is that I have Brand New, and that we got married, and that everything in our relationship is working out well. And any of that could have easily been not true, and then this year would have been even more horrible. So it's something that you kind of take a little bit for granted because it's your significant other and they're every day. But it's definitely something that that I've come to appreciate more, I think, because it is 2020 and we see what's happening out there.
Very true.
Yeah, you?
I mean, our plan is to just go pick up some food from Whole Foods. They pre-prepare a really good Thanksgiving meal.
Nice.
So that
is it hot and you're gonna bring it back, or are you gonna bring it back to heat up?
We just have to reheat it. That's it. Yeah. All right.
Iggy seems to object to your Thanksgiving plans. That is leaving Iggy out. What is Iggy getting for Thanksgiving?
She's even if I say she's getting nothing, sorry, Iggy. She's gonna get a lot. That's just the way it is.
All right. Question from the GOAT brought to you by our Patreons, patreon.com/grinandgoat. Thank you to all of our Patreons again. And we still have a handful, not quite a handful, but we do have a few more stickers left. So if you qualify for the stickers, meaning if you've been a sub or a Patreon that's at the $6 or more level for more than a year at this point, please feel free to email gradinggogaming@gmail.com with your address, and we will send you a sticker. We're running out. We're getting to the end of the line here, but we still have a couple more. So if anyone else qualifies, just let us know and we'll ship them out. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. Patreon.com/gradinggoat. And tier list update coming sometime next week. I know this is probably the slowest we've come to doing our first update on the tier list, but it's a mix of, there were 4 cards and none of them were neutral commons that I thought we got wrong from a technical perspective that we would actually make a change for. And then the rest is all major systemic changes, which just take a lot of time to do in terms of, because it's affecting the core of how we figure out how and when you play a card. And it's not the biggest, thing that's making everything off, but it makes everything off a little bit, and it's really affecting some of these smaller mana cost corrupt cards. So it's just taking a while to fix and nail everything down. But hopefully that's coming out next week as well. Hopefully Blizzard will come out with a arena offering odds adjust next week as well. We'll see. I know we haven't commented on the whole Battle Pass thing because it kind of happened and then, the expansions released. We may talk about it next week. We may talk about, we probably will talk about some Battlegrounds next week as we move past the immediate Arena podcast. And we'll definitely still talk more about Arena as we dig deeper into the Darkmoon Fair meta, and maybe talk about some more class-specific things. But for now, explore Demon Hunter. Right? We talked about before where Demon Hunter came in, they weren't all that good, and then they were okay. Well, now they're back to being really good, so, play your Demon Hunters. Figure it out. All right. Until next time, this is Abuktan.
Perps. See you guys.